All right, Clean Freaks, we are back in studio again with the Packaging Princess, our 2024 Sterile Packaging Expert, Malinda Elammari from Healthmark Industries, a Gattaca company. We have talked about a lot of things already, Malinda, and we are still on the topic of pill packs because they're such a critical part and often overlooked part of the sterile processing process when it comes to packaging. We left off last month with one little nuance that I want to wrap up here before we get into the storage aspect of pill packs, and that's the weight question for pill packing. Kind of lay out here, compliance-wise, how should folks approach the weight question? Does it matter? If it does, where do you find that information? Kind of set us straight here in the next couple of minutes.
I couldn't wait for this one.
Wonderful.
It gets cornier as we go.
Right.
So when we talk about weight, some of the IFUs for packaging actually calls out a certain weight limit in their IFUs. So meaning, most of the time it's like a 2-pound weight limit or something like that. So that means you can't put a 3-pound mallet in a peel pouch, right? Which truthfully, you really don't want to be doing that, right? So when it comes to weight, there's so many different factors that are taken in play with the makeup of the pouches themselves. And so understanding the paper grade that you're dealing with, right? Like the thickness of the paper and what does that look like? Another test, a test that's done when they're doing validation studies to get approval and stuff for their pouching, the manufacturers have to do what's called a seal integrity test. So making sure that it can withstand a certain amount of pressure within that seal to remain sterile. And then they also have to do a tensile strength test. So to make sure that that pouch can withhold certain amount of pressure and weight. Now, some manufacturers don't list a weight in there. And that's just because usually like when they go to like their labs to do their testing and stuff, they're using such a high weight, like a 10-pound concept that, and once again, so many factors, the strength of the paper, the laminate layers of the plastic, all of that come into play. And, their concept behind it is, well, there's so many factors that really determine whether you break this pouch or not. It's not just the weight, but it's also the design of the device you're putting in, right? So it really comes down to what your IFUs say. If your IFUs have a weight limit on there, you have to abide by that. But I truly tell people, make sure you're paying attention to the thickness of your pouches. They're not all the same. They're not all the same grade paper. And so some are made to hold heavier, sturdier stuff versus some thinner ones that are just not made for that.
Even up to the level, and I'm sure some folks tuning in have seen these, but there's pill pouches that are large enough to place an entire vendor tray inside of. And that all goes back to what you're saying. They're designed differently, there's different materials in play. So it looks and feels like a normal pill pack. It's just much larger, but it's also much stronger and has been validated in that different process, so you're right, that IFU portion of the weight's really important, plus a little mixture of critical thinking, which is always good to have when you're making these decisions.
And to your point, we see that in Europe. Europe tends to package trays more than the United States does, like a whole tray in a peel pouch. So, we just we haven't adopted that practice yet.
Yeah, that kind of when you hear that the first time in the U.S., it kind of takes your breath away, like, well, no way, But yeah, that's pretty standard practice out there. So it just goes back to the process that we've talked up to this point, and then now what we're going to take the rest of this episode, which is how are you handling all of these packages after the stages have been completed, after they've been processed, and now we're into the sterile storage piece. So talk to us about the pressure around sterile storage and these pill packs. What are some common mistakes, I guess? Maybe let's start there for how folks store these.
Yeah. So, once again, when we're looking at storage guidelines and stuff, 79 section 11 talks about your sterile storage. and things that you should pay attention to. You know, we were just talking about the makeup of your pouches. That plays such a critical role in how you store your pouches. So, for instance, I go into facilities and I will see pouches folded, right? They fold the pouch to make it fit inside a bin or to make it sit correctly or whatever it may be. Folding peel pouches actually starts breaking down the polymer chains that make up the pouches. And over time, that starts breaking down the integrity of the pouch. So when we start getting down to the molecular structure of the pouches and stuff, and you know, the manufacturers who create these pouches, they strongly recommend you don't fold the pouch, period, right? And so no folding of the pouches, even in sterile storage. We often go in, we see trays sitting on top of peel pouches. We also see pouches stuffed inside wraps, like the fold of the wraps, right? Because they're trying to do this whole one-stop shop concept, right?
Right.
Which is not allowed. And, you know, we see things like rigid containers on top of peel pouches. So there's so many different factors. One of the other things that I love is you go into a facility and they have pouches and they're all stuffed in, you got like 60 pouches stuffed in this little bin, you know. First of all, par level, right? Let's keep up with par level. Let's, you know, figure out what's the best number to have on hand for your facility and what they need, because we need to make sure we're doing a rotation and stuff of these pouches. We're keeping that integrity. We pull pouches out of that sterile storage and we often see wrinkles and, you know, the back looks like somebody took it and crumbled it. And that's because it's been handled and put back so many times and not used, and it's just been sitting there and shoved around. When we hold that up, and if you take that and put it under a microscope, all those wrinkles and little creases that you see on those pouches, once again, the molecular structure, you're breaking it down, right? And then you start getting micro holes in there, tiny little holes inside that pouch that, you know, just destroy the whole sterility barrier system. So that's another thing that we see with storage. One of my favorites.
I mean, sometimes it's not even micro holes, right?
Yes,
sometimes
exactly.
it's like you can see the whole
It's
clear as day without a microscope. Yeah.
For the unaided eye, as they say. One of my favorite things that I just love is the new trend now is hanging peel pouches. So people will puncture a hole in the peel pouch, right? And hang pouches, or they put these little tabs on it. And they're like, well, we're not puncturing a hole, so we're just putting a tab on it and hanging it. Once again, the way that those pouches are made up and the manufacturing of those pouches, they are not tested to be hung. They're not validated for that process. So the ones that we make up, you're putting so much pressure on that seal, which they've not been tested for. They are not made to do that. So you don't want to compromise the sterility of those pouches. And I have yet today to see a manufacturer who says, yes, go ahead and hang our pouches, because you're just breaking it down. Once again, you're destroying that pouch. There are some out there, for like instance, you can see like in a cath lab, you have stents and stuff like that. They come and they're hung. But those are a lighter item. They're made to be, and they were validated in that process. So making sure that we understand sterile storage is critical, and we're making sure we're doing the process correctly.
Is the best case scenario then kind of from beginning to end to store these pill packs on their back on the paper side? Are you saying also like potentially they shouldn't even be stored in kind of a vertical fashion either?
So storing on a vertical fashion is actually the best scenario, right?
Oh,
yes,
that is. Okay.
Because we want that to be stored, because we don't want it on the paper side. We don't want to put holes in it and stuff, the pressure on that. So vertical is usually our best storage. It's just making sure you're maintaining how many you're putting in at one time. You're shoving them in, and just being aware and watching what you're doing with the pouching for storage.
Well, if you think your sterile storage area is epic, just wait until we bring Malinda back for our next interview, because we're going to be talking about something else that's epic, and that is the wrapping battles out there. And we're going to talk about wrapping practice. So we're going to move away a little bit from the pill pack conversation, but we're going to stay in the sterile packaging conversation because, as you know, hopefully by now, we're speaking with the packaging princess herself. And so we're going to bring her back in studio again next month to talk about wrapping. But if you've got any other questions not answered yet, we're going to have Malinda's contact info in the description of every one of these episodes. So feel free to reach out. Just because she didn't touch on the topic doesn't mean that she doesn't have great insight to share. And like we tell you every week here at Beyond Clean, thank you for tuning in and keep fighting dirty.